Ladies and gentlemen, please place your attention on the stage.
In 586, before Common Era, Jerusalem walls are breached. The temple is set on fire. And those of us in the fallen kingdom of Judah are marched captives by the king Nebuchadnezzar to Babylon. There we sat and wept by its rivers. We wept for Zion. But we didn't weep too long. We were encouraged and guided by the prophets, Yirmiyahu, Ezekiel, Ezra. And we managed to transform Judaism into a mobile faith with laws and synagogue and prayer instead of a temple. And that kept our identity for the long exile and a diaspora of 2,500 years. Those of us who stayed in Babylon and in the East had to negotiate their safety and their prosperity with umpteen kings and sultans, with empires, and we outlived them all. We built a civilization. We wrote the Talmud. We opened the first universities, modern universities. And you know, by the turn of the century, of the 20th century, the Jews of Iraq were 40% of Baghdad. And so they were in the other countries. We were participants in every single aspect of the young countries of the 20th century. Literature, politics, music, banking, you name it, we were there. That harmony was shattered by a Nazi-inspired pogrom in 1941, which we commemorated it yesterday. But the true displacement was saved for state declaration of the State of Israel in 1948. Then 7 armies tried to annihilate that young country. And in their defeat, the Jews of the Arab world paid a heavy price. We were ethnically displaced, and the vast majority was sent packing with every asset of theirs was confiscated. I was born in 1955. I was oblivious to this history. I have very fond memories of my childhood. And suddenly, in a flash, everything turned into a nightmare. In 1963, every Jew who were in Iraq had to present himself and swap their Iraqi identity for this. This yellow document that marked us as second or third class citizens from then on. Things were to get worse. On the eve of 1967, another war of annihilation, we knew already, instinctively, that we will be paying a heavy price whether we win or we lose. And on January 27, 1969, we wake up to this spectacle of 14 people hanged that day, and their bodies were displayed in the public square of Baghdad and Basra. 500,000 people were dancing under their bodies, and every one of 10 of those were Jews, and each one of them was wrapped in a white linen and set with the word Jew on the front, with his name and an address at the back. And this was live streamed all day long. 55 people followed suit. And only by the grace of God, in 1971, 1,900 Jews were able to escape through the Kurdish mountains of North Iraq. And I here greet and salute the Kurdish people for standing. They were the only one who could have stand with us, and they did so then. We arrived to the United Kingdom as refugees, asylum seekers, but we soon rebuilt our lives. My father, the lawyer, found a job within 2 weeks, packing T-shirts in the East End of London. But he did so 6 days a week, and he sent me to university. And I did so, and I sent my son to Cambridge. And so did your grandparents. That is the Jewish way of life. We move on, and we are loyal and faithful to our country. This is the story of 1 million Jews in the Arab world. And if you want to understand the Middle East, and if you want to understand Israel, then it's not only need to hear me, but you need to incorporate it into the history, into the curriculum of your schools, into the same way as we do with the Haggadah Pesach. I have a personal addendum to this story. In 2003, I was the first to go to Baghdad again. I am not going to let go of my history of 2,600 years so meekly. I am not letting go of shrines of 5 biblical prophets, or the cemetery where my grandfather is buried, or the school, or the Tigris and the Euphrates with which I drank, or the good people of Iraq who protected us and worked with us for hundreds of years before. In 2015, I bought a home there. And I hear a big scream, a silent scream from you. Why? Why would you do that? And I tell you why I do that. I do that because I don't think the last chapter has been written yet. And I think there is a post-exile role for the Jews of Arab countries and for all of us to work with our neighbors, the Arabs. I believe so. And for this, I am ready to risk my own safety. But you know what? Otherwise, the risk is high. To let this space be occupied by extremists and anti-Semites in our absence would be much more dangerous wherever we are. The Arab street has changed. You freely now hear people tell you, come back. You freely have people wanting to reconnect. And you frequently hear the one sentence. When the Jew left, the barakah, the blessing, left with them. And we have heard this before. We have heard this in Portugal and in Spain and in umpteen countries that gave us a brutal and painful history. Come back. And I tell you where I have heard it before. I have read it many times, but only today I decipher it. I read it in Bereshit, in Genesis chapter 12. And it says, God Almighty talking to Abraham, and he says, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great. And listen to this. And you shall be a blessing. And he carries on and says, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you. AJC, Lech Lecha, go forth, be the blessing we are, and let the families of the earth be blessed by us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you. All acabou. On May 14th of 1948, there were 2 events that had the most impact on my life. The first one is one we all share. The State of Israel was born. The second one is a more personal one. That same day, a ship carrying my then 23-year-old grandmother arrived to the port of La Guaira, near Caracas in Venezuela. She was coming from England after spending there 10 years, living with a non-Jewish family that took her in after she fled her hometown in Poland. All of her family was murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators, except for 2 of her sisters whom she had come to visit in Venezuela. One of those sisters, actually, was the one who saved her life by forcing her, when she was only 13 years old, to board a kinder transport, one of the trains that carried Jewish children out of Europe, Eastern Europe, to a safe destination in the UK. It was during that visit in Caracas where she met my grandfather. They fell in love, married, and made a new life in a new country, in a new home, surrounded by the warmness and the kindness of the Venezuelan people. A few decades later, I was born. I was raised within the Venezuelan Jewish community, where I formed a very strong Jewish identity that has guided me ever since. At age 21, I decided to make Aliyah, fulfilling my childhood dream of becoming Israeli. There, I also became an immigrant myself, struggling hard to integrate in society. I worked in several jobs. I spent a lot of hours learning Hebrew. I served in the Israeli Defense Forces. There I met new family and new friends that are with me up until today. As a student at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, I came across another huge opportunity that I took in a heartbeat: to enroll in one of the most prestigious PhD programs in economics here in the United States. Perhaps being an immigrant myself and the story of my late grandparents is what motivated part of my own research during my dissertation and later on studying the huge benefits that immigrants and refugees can bring to an economy only if they're allowed to integrate and work. But you know, the story of my grandparents was not unique. Venezuela had received many, many other refugees and migrants from many places in the world, from Europe after World War II, and from Latin America, fleeing dictatorships. Actually, for a century prior to World War II, Venezuela actively welcomed foreigners and became the poster child in the region and the world on how to integrate its immigrants. This, to me, actually is one of the secrets on how Venezuela came to be one of the richest countries on its region and in the world. But sadly, today, that same country is going through a huge humanitarian catastrophe that is comparable only to countries undergoing war and conflict. Since 2014, nearly 4 million refugees have left Venezuela and are now throughout the continent. This crisis has the potential, sadly, to surpass the Syrian refugee crisis. During the past year, as an economist at the Brookings Institution here in Washington, D.C., I've been privileged to work hand in hand with governments in the region and with the Organization of American States in the very challenging task on thinking how to best achieve the integration of millions of my countrymates. In my numerous visits to the Venezuelan-Colombian border, I've met many of these refugees, all of them wonderful people, whom with just a little bit of help, they could really get ahead and reach their full potential. So over 70 years since my grandparents were welcomed by Venezuela as refugees, here I am, trying to reciprocate just a little bit by helping millions of my countrymates to integrate, as they are now the ones who are refugees and fleeing for survival. My Jewish identity, no doubt, has played a huge role in guiding me through this task. Two of our most important values are to love our neighbors as ourselves, ve'ahavta l'ra'acha kamocha, and to fix and repair the world, tikkun olam. But we also have pretty good precedents in terms of actions and not only words. You know, in 1977, the very first act of government that Menachem Begin did when he came to power was to allow into Israel 66 Vietnamese refugees who were fleeing war. We have never forgotten, Begin said, when explaining his action. The boat with 900 Jews that left Germany just a few weeks before the beginning of World War II, traveling from harbor to harbor, from country to country, and they were refused. Therefore, Begin said, it was natural that my first act as prime minister was to give these people a haven in Israel. And indeed, when I think about it, Begin really verbalized what I've learned throughout my own journey. As an immigrant myself, grandson of refugees, and as someone who's devoted most of my time to researching and studying the huge benefits that migrants can bring to an economy and to a country only if they're allowed to integrate. The natural thing for us to do, as Jews, as humans, is to help and welcome those in need, always.
Mr. Secretary, you've been a passionate supporter of Israel for much of your life, a very passionate supporter. Help us understand what explains that passion.
So yes, long before I came here to be the Secretary of State, or even when I was the CIA director, I've known of the deep, important relationship between our two countries. Certainly a relationship founded in the mutual security interest that we have, but also the nature of the two countries, democracies with a profound respect for the rule of law and property rights and freedom and entrepreneurship, and a profound respect for the protection of religious freedom to practice religious freedoms in the way that every individual wants to do. Also, as an evangelical Christian, it's something I've known was an important place in our history and our shared histories. And so I've always had a special place in my heart for Israel.
As we meet, there are the first sort of hints of what's coming in the deal of the century, as it's been referred to, including the rollout of the workshop in Bahrain and the focus on the economic dimension. If I may, to begin with, how much of these possibilities have been framed by the change in relations between Israel and some of its key Sunni Arab partners?
So I think that's central to what we're trying to accomplish. When I say we, I mean lots of countries, not just those of us here in this administration. There's a broad understanding that it's time to resolve this conflict in a way that Israel and the Palestinian people both get, and get that it makes sense for them to engage in. It protects the security interest, it helps economically, it makes people of both regions, both places better off. The work that has been done over the past years, including a very important meeting in Warsaw, where we saw Gulf states come together with Israel in a way that hasn't happened in decades. I think that's important. I think it creates an opening for the very possibility that we can conclude this.
So when we recently met with some of the Gulf Arab leaders, there was almost a sense that, you know what, we're moving ahead on our own with Israel. We're no longer waiting for the Palestinians who for too long drove this train. Is the momentum being reversed now with the Arab countries, in a sense, driving the train and telling the Palestinians either hop on the train or you may be left behind?
You know, my sense is, I think there's still a deep and profound desire from the Gulf states, the other states in the region, that are hopeful that there'll be a deal that the Palestinian people, both in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, find is in their best interest. But I think they also have come to understand that there has to be a partner on that side of the table. There has to be someone who represents them. It can't be a terrorist group. It can't be someone who's afraid to take some risk. That is, if this deal is to get done, both the parties will have to take some risk.
And given the precedent of both Gaza and Lebanon, where radical Islamists stepped into the breach, what can be said to the Israelis about addressing those security concerns down the road?
Well, it is unimaginable that any arrangement will be agreed to by the Israelis absent them protecting their own national security interests. That's a prerequisite. It's a challenge, but I'm hopeful, as are Mr. Kushner and Mr. Greenblatt, who have been working on this as their central activity, that we will find partners throughout the Middle East, find partners among the Palestinian people who will see that these decades of anger and of fighting haven't proven productive. You can see it when you travel from Israel to the West Bank. You can see the difference.
So just to flip it for a moment, Mr. Secretary, the Palestinians say, how can we get a fair deal from an administration that has been tilted so much in favor of Israel with respect to the transfer of the embassy to Jerusalem, the annexation of Golan, the withdrawal from the JCPOA, which I hope we'll get to in just a moment. How can we expect a fair deal from this administration?
So I've heard that critique, or
I've heard
that risk identified. Look, our role in this is to try and provide helpful ideas, a vision, some guidance, some of our diplomatic capacity to share these ideas and help think through. We also think, and you'll see this at the end of June, we think we can bring resources that will help the Palestinian people as well. I think when the world sees this, I think when the Gulf states see this, and when the Palestinians see this, and the Israelis see this, I am very hopeful they will keep an open mind. That when they see the paragraph that they don't like, or the phrase that they would prefer not be contained in this vision, that they'll mark it, that they'll flag it, and they'll consider it, but that they will take the entire context of what we are proposing as our vision for moving forward, and we can begin to build from that. If we can get that far, if we can get serious, good faith people on all sides of this issue to seriously sit down and have a conversation, we will have done more than has happened in recent history.
Let me turn the tables for a moment to the burning issue on the front pages of the papers today, and that's Iran. The president tweeted quite clearly that if Iran keeps going in a dangerous direction, the consequences could be very severe. How would you assess the situation at the moment?
So over the past, what would now be 2.5 weeks, we've seen increased threat reporting that affected American interests. You've seen the decision the president made to move increased U.S. Department of Defense resources into the region. Those aren't there to start a war. President Trump's made very clear that's not our objective. Those go there to deter conflict and to be able to ensure that we can protect American interests there if need be, should the Iranians strike. I think the president's tweet last night reflected that. I think his statement was pretty clear.
Very clear.
But I want to make sure we put into context. The past 3 weeks don't begin to capture all of what's taken place with Iran. It is 40 years of aggression, 40 years of arming proxy forces, 40 years of putting explosive devices in the ground that killed hundreds of Americans, 40 years of arming Hezbollah and disrupting Lebanon, today disrupting Yemen by underwriting the Houthis, firing missiles even today into Saudi Arabia. All of the things we've seen, this malign activity that is thrust upon the world by the Islamic Republic of Iran, that's what has brought us to this point. You add into that their nuclear program, and you have the nation in the Middle East that is causing the most instability in the Middle East. It's why President Trump and our Middle East policy have focused on Iran, and we're going to continue to do so.
And to what extent have we been successful in enlisting allies to the cause? I mean, we clearly have not convinced the Europeans as yet to withdraw from the JCPOA as we have. Where do we stand in sort of enlisting the world to be with us on this issue?
So I actually think we've done very well.
Good.
I'll concede the E3 have decided to go a different direction on the JCPOA. It is their assessed judgment that the best way to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon is to stay in that deal. President Trump and our administration fundamentally disagree with that. So there's a split there. And we should be honest about that, and I have been when I interact with my European counterparts. With respect to the risks that are presented to Europe by Iran, there is no daylight.
Hezbollah is an Iranian armed, funded, and trained sort of subsidiary of Tehran. AJC, for years, working with the U.S. government and others, has been trying to persuade the Europeans that this artificial division into a political and military wing makes no sense. Do you see any progress in convincing our European friends and partners to list Hezbollah in its entirety as a terrorist organization rather than continue this fiction?
We work on it. I can't say that I've seen. I can't say that I've seen.
Do I take comfort from that?
I can't say that I've seen any material progress there. Although I do think the Brits and the Germans and the French are all really looking at this hard and rethinking it. They each have long histories with Lebanon, unique histories that are different from ours, and so I have respect for that. The American position is very clear. This is a unitary entity. It is a terrorist organization. It is underwritten by the Islamic Republic of Iran, and it in its entirety must be designated as a terrorist entity, and we should make sure that all of those involved and connected to Hezbollah are also falling under sanctions.
Mr. Secretary, when we first met with you in your conference room, the post of Special Envoy on Anti-Semitism was empty, and you made a commitment to the AJC delegation that you would fill it. You filled it with Elon Carr, whom we know and who hit the ground running, to say the least, very impressively. Other than moral suasion, what tools does the United States have to deal with the phenomenon of rising anti-Semitism around the world?
It's a very good question. Not as many as I wish. I wish there was more capacity for us to influence. It's a historic challenge and sadly on the rise in Europe and frankly here in the United States as well. So we spend a lot of time working on it in terms of moral suasion. We speak about it every place that we go. I raise this in nearly every visit that I have if we're in a place which doesn't have religious freedom or there is rampant anti-Semitism. When on my last trip to the United Kingdom, I had not one but two gatherings where that was a central feature of what we were looking at. We've watched the Labor Party move off the reservation on anti-Semitism in a way that is truly dangerous for the people of the United Kingdom. But we also do consider how governments are behaving with respect to anti-Semitism when we're thinking about foreign assistance and the broader set of diplomatic tools that we have to bring to bear. I don't want to mislead. It's one of a multiple set of factors as we think about how to get countries to behave in ways that we would prefer they did. But you should know that the Trump administration puts a really high value on this mission set, and we're doing all that we can to reduce the risk of anti-Semitism all across the world.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I know our time is up. I simply want to thank you for making time for this. I know originally your intention was to come and speak at the AJC Global Forum, but as my kids would say, stuff happens, and you have to travel. There are several thousand people who will be watching this who will be very appreciative both of your time and especially of your friendship. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much. I regret I can't be there. Good luck to you all.
Thank you.
Please welcome AJC President John Shapiro.
Thank you very much for my last act. I am delighted to be able to introduce Senator Rob Portman. He's now had close to 3 decades of public service. He was in the President George H.W. Bush's office of White House counsel. He's been a congressman. He's been a U.S. trade representative, and now, of course, a senator. He's always been an individual who stood by his principles while being a model of civility and a leader in the search for consensus. He's been an example of bipartisanship in a polarized world and a dedicated proponent of pragmatic policy solutions. Throughout his career, Senator Portman has been a dear friend to AJC, a dedicated ally of Israel and the Jewish people, and a staunch proponent of U.S. global leadership. Just last month, he joined us to celebrate the 75th anniversary of AJC Cleveland. In a wonderful conversation with the other senator from Ohio, Sherrod Brown, moderated by AJC CEO David Harris, he spoke eloquently against the vitriol of anti-Semitism and reaffirmed his commitment to fighting BDS. We are honored to have him back with us today, this time on the AJC Global Forum stage. Without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to the senator from the great state of Ohio, Rob Portman.
John, thank you very much. And I understand this is your last meeting as president of AJC, so it's appropriate to say thank you for your long service and congratulations. And I know you won't be a stranger. And David Harris, thank you for including me today. I was invited for one of 2 reasons. One is that David heard that Pompeo had to be overseas at the last minute, and he was on his contact list. And what comes after Pompeo? Portman. He said, what the hell, we'll try Portman. He's next. The other reason is that, as John indicated, I was in Cleveland recently with my colleague Sherrod Brown, doing really a bipartisan tribute to the AJC in Cleveland for their 75th, which is pretty impressive. By the way, Cincinnati also had its 75th. Alicia Shapiro's here from Cleveland. Kathy Heldman is here from Cincinnati. They look pretty good for 75. So anyway, we had a great conversation, and Sherrod and I went back and forth with David being the moderator. And my favorite part of the evening was after we were done, David stood up and he gave a 20-minute articulate summation of the 4,000-year history of the Jewish people. No notes. So afterwards I said, that was mesmerizing. And I think he invited me hoping that I would say that again, which I just did. He says that is the reason. Anyway, thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work you do, and thanks for supporting AJC. You do great work. You carried the torch for a mission that is really simple to say, but really difficult to carry out, and that's building a safer, more secure future for the Jewish people, for Israel, and for all humanity. Pretty broad mission. It's a mission all of us embrace, one that's indispensable, but also, sadly, in today's world, one that's more and more challenging. The Jewish people, Israel, and all of humanity. Let me take a minute to touch on each of them. First, a few words about the fight against anti-Semitism. Tragically, this is a phenomenon that the Jewish people have been confronting not for months or years during this administration, but not for decades, but for millennia. And so, whether you go back to the Pharaoh in ancient Egypt or up to modern-day Pittsburgh and Paris, the cycle of hate has become all too familiar. Rather than embrace the idea that we're all made in the image of our Creator, too many are looking for the other to blame, aren't they? And too often the other becomes the Jewish people. Many people thought that after the horrors of the Holocaust, perhaps the fever of hate had broken. But clearly it hasn't. So AJC's role continues, and it's an incredibly important role. This hatred, by the way, is coming from across the spectrum and across the nations. So the first obligation of all of us, but especially those of us who are in leadership positions, is to state clearly, stop the hate now. Just state it clearly. And let's be really careful not to make it partisan. Whether it is a Facebook posting or whether it's an editorial cartoon, you find it on the right and you find it on the left. Anti-Semitism has simply no place in a world where we're all children of God, and that's what we ought to focus on. While we confront anti-Semitism, we've got to acknowledge it exists, and we've got to help keep people safe in Jewish communities and in all religious communities. In April, as you all are aware, the shooting outside of San Diego took the life of Lori Gilbert Kay. She heroically sacrificed herself to save her rabbi. 6 months to the day prior to that, the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, claimed 11 lives, which was the worst anti-Semitic violence in U.S. history. And I should add, hundreds of Christians in Sri Lanka were massacred in churches and hotels on Easter Sunday. In New Zealand, the shooting at the mosques in Christchurch killed at least 49 people. So it goes beyond, the hatred goes beyond the anti-Semitism we've talked about. 3 days after the attacks at that synagogue at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, I went to the Jewish Community Center in Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown's only about 60 miles away from Pittsburgh, a lot of affinity between eastern Ohio and western PA. And I met with the Jewish community leadership there in Youngstown to express my solidarity with the community and frankly to meet with the media to be able to make a clear and unequivocal statement, as I had done previously in Columbus, Ohio, after we had some acts of hatred, some graffiti that was sprayed on some buildings in Cincinnati and Columbus. And it's important to do that, to talk about the need to stop anti-Semitism and hatred. What I asked them there in that meeting was, give me some input. What do you need, as I have in other cities in our state of Ohio? And what people kept coming back with was, among other things, let's ensure that the federal government is doing a better job, that those resources are available to better keep the Jewish community safe. I think that's part of how we should lead. We should go to Youngstown, to Pittsburgh, or wherever else Jews feel threatened and say, an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. I commend AJC for spearheading the Community of Conscience initiative to create an interfaith dialogue aimed at disarming the hateful language and the acts of violence towards houses of worship across the board. Forums like that, I think, are crucial for giving a voice to the principles of religious tolerance in a time when, again, indeed, so many people are choosing intolerance instead. Sadly, if the trends we're seeing are any indication, these attacks are not going to go away anytime soon. So what can Congress do? Well, one thing we can and should do is provide more help to synagogues, to schools, to Jewish community centers, and other faith-based organizations. Provide them with the best practices on security. So taking from the Department of Homeland Security in particular, some of the expertise and being sure that's available, but also providing resources that these communities need now to secure their facilities effectively. I've become the lead supporter in what's known as the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. Some of you are aware of it because you have accessed it. It allows nonprofits, including synagogues and other faith-based organizations, to apply for funds they can use to access best practices, to secure their facilities, train personnel. And now, very recently, under new DHS rules that I strongly support, allows them to hire armed security personnel. Sadly, it's needed. Last year, I led a bipartisan letter with Senator Casey to push for a total of $60 million for the program. I'm happy to say that funding level was incorporated in the final Homeland Security Appropriations Agreement, so the Congress bumped up that funding. This year, I'm working with my colleagues to increase the amount of that funding to $75 million. By the way, that additional $15 million would go toward smaller communities, because right now, the funding is focused on larger urban areas. Sadly, as we've seen, whether it's Pownell or elsewhere, some small-town worshipers need to feel safer too. So I hope you'll raise the importance of these grants, of this program, on your visits here this week. Not everybody knows it exists, so I also hope you will do what you can back home to spread the word about it and let people know that these grants are available. Anti-Semitism takes a lot of forms, doesn't it? I also want to talk for a moment about BDS, the boycotts, divestment, and sanctions on Israel. I call BDS what it is, which is discrimination. And let me be very clear. People can choose to buy whatever they want. If people want to go in a grocery store and boycott a particular product, that's up to them. But the BDS movement shows an unacceptable selective outrage about one country. It creates a new set of standards for one country while ignoring territorial disputes and atrocious behavior, truly atrocious behavior around the globe. So think about what's going on in Tibet. Think about Crimea, Cyprus, Kashmir, and yet Israel is singled out. I've been working on this issue on a bipartisan basis for a long time with Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, and it should be a bipartisan issue. It should be nonpartisan. We wrote the anti-BDS legislation that was signed into law by President Obama a few years ago that said that U.S. trade negotiations must take on BDS when working on a trade agreement with other countries. If you want to do business with the United States of America, you can't discriminate against Israel, period. I got involved in this issue on the trade front because of my experience. I was told, well, there really is no place for BDS in terms of trade negotiations. It's a different issue. I said, not really. You know, when I was U.S. Trade Representative, John mentioned that we had trade negotiations going with Saudi Arabia to get them into the WTO. We raised the issue successfully. We also had trade agreements that we negotiated with Bahrain and Oman. And at the time, I was told, you can't push the boycott issue. They have Israel boycotts in place because of their internal politics. That they just need to have that in place. You have to trust us on this. I said, no, I don't trust you on that. We're going to tell them, if you want to do business with the United States of America, you remove those boycotts. And ladies and gentlemen, in both those trade agreements, the boycotts were removed. So I've seen it work with trade, and it is a lever that we can use. Now Ben Cardin and I have another bill that will extend the anti-boycott laws to international organizations like the UN Human Rights Commission. Now, and the EU, by the way. This is necessary. I view these international organizations as actually the biggest threat right now on the BDS front. They are proposing, as you may know, to blacklist all U.S. companies that do business east of the Green Line. So it's coming. They've said it's coming. They've delayed it temporarily. So let's pass a law now that says the United States will not participate in this and will provide sanctions if indeed other countries go along with such a boycott. By the way, almost all of those companies employ a lot of Palestinians. And I hope that people in this room agree with me, we need peace in the Middle East. And I'm a strong proponent of a peace plan. But this gets us off track, takes us away from what we have to do in order to have a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. Picking out one country, Israel, for a double standard and constant attack for the purpose of isolating and really delegitimizing that country is not only wrong, but it's morally offensive. We've got to continue to stand up to it. We need to persevere, and we need to have a unified moral voice. Israel has been the target of military and terrorist attacks since its founding in 1948. They've gotten kind of used to that. This is new, and in a way, this attack is more pernicious because, again, it goes to the legitimacy of the country. Senator Cardin and I also recently introduced a new bipartisan, bicameral resolution, which is really simple. It's kind of a step back to say, what is this BDS thing all about? It says BDS is wrong, it's anti-Israel, it's anti-peace. I trust that you will raise this issue also during your Washington visits, both the legislation that deals with the international organizations, but also this resolution, which, frankly, should be a no-brainer. It should be one that the House and Senate passes. Particularly, I would think the House would be interested in getting clearly on record against discrimination. On a personal level, I've always been inspired by Israel, by being there, by seeing the perseverance. I've got a lot of memories. One is making a journey with my wife from Bethlehem to the Stations of the Cross, to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, to the Western Wall, all in one day. Amazing. All of the history, all of the traditions. I've seen the bravery and resilience of the people of Sderot. That was an incredible visit, to see these children playing inside of the hardened playground because they can't play outside for fear of being attacked by rockets from Gaza. That perseverance, everybody with their own bomb shelters outside of their homes, living like that, and yet persevering. The democracy, the people, the remarkable history have deeply affected my actions as a policy person. When I was in the House and the Senate, as I mentioned, at USTR, but also at OMB, when I was the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, I had the honor of working with Condoleezza Rice on finding the funding for a 10-year memorandum of understanding that assured Israel's qualitative military edge. That's also really important. And the work is not done. A final thought on the key ingredient for all of this, whether it's the safety for the Jewish people, for Israel, for all of humanity, your entire mission, none of it can be accomplished without a strong AJC, but also a strong America. American strength, American leadership, American values matter. I've seen this in all my experiences. I just got back from Ukraine, as I was telling John, and I was there last week meeting with the new President Zelensky. And by the way, they have a prime minister and a president who is Jewish. I mean, who'd have thought in Ukraine? The tradition and the history of that country is not good with regard to discrimination and the Jewish people. And yet here we have this situation where America can play the most powerful role to stand up beside this country, to continue to move them toward the West, to continue to have them embrace democracy and the values that we hold dear, including fighting corruption, including fighting discrimination. The key is that America remain that beacon of hope, that beacon of freedom. And that requires a strong economy. That requires a strong military. Peace through strength works. We've got to continue American leadership and engagement because it's the best guarantee of our dreams of a more peaceful world, our dreams of a strong Israel, our dreams of a world that's more tolerant and democratic and free. That's how those dreams will come true. So today, let's recommit ourselves to work together. The American Jewish Committee, the Congress, the administration, all of us, to demonstrate that kind of leadership each and every day. Thank you all, and God bless.
let me say hello to my friends in the American Jewish Committee, and thank you for allowing me to say a few words to the AJC Global Forum. As many of you know, I am Jewish and very proud of my heritage. My father emigrated from Poland to the United States at the age of 17 to escape the poverty and widespread anti-Semitism in his home country. Those in his family who remained in Poland after Hitler came to power were murdered by the Nazis. Anti-Semitism is not some abstract idea to me. It is very personal. It destroyed a good part of my family. And more recently, I had the sad opportunity to discuss the horror of anti-Semitism when I met with the rabbi at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where 11 people were murdered in cold blood by a sick anti-Semitic individual. I know that many Jewish Americans and Jews all over the world have, in one way or another, been impacted by anti-Semitism. And that is why I so strongly believe that Jews who have been victims of discrimination for centuries must help lead the effort in fighting back against hatred and racism whenever and wherever we see it. On this, there can be no disagreement. And let me now say a word about Israel. As someone who believes absolutely and unequivocally in Israel's right to exist in peace and security, who as a young man lived in Israel for a number of months, as someone who is deeply concerned about the global rise of anti-Semitism, we must say loudly and clearly that to oppose the reactionary policies of Prime Minister Netanyahu does not make anyone anti-Israel. Let me say it again. I am vigorously opposed to the reactionary, racist, and authoritarian policies of Donald Trump. That does not make me anti-American. And I am not anti-Israel because I oppose Netanyahu's policies. My friends, the issues that we are dealing with in the Middle East and around the world are enormously complicated. There are heroes and villains on all sides, and no one has any simple or magical answer. Real solutions will require a great deal of hard work. But what I do know is that the United States of America should lead the world with a foreign policy which emphasizes the need to bring nations together, which focuses on diplomacy and international cooperation, on democracy and human rights, rather than a foreign policy that emphasizes the continued use of military force. When I look at the Middle East, for example, I see Israel making enormous technological advances with the capacity to serve as an engine of innovation and prosperity for the entire region, yet unable to achieve this goal because of its unresolved conflict with the Palestinians. And I see a Palestinian people crushed underneath a military occupation now over a half-century old, creating a daily reality of pain, humiliation, and resentment. Let me be clear. I do not know how peace can be achieved in that region when in the Gaza Strip, poverty is rampant. 53% of the people are unemployed. The number of unemployed is even higher for young people, and 99% of the residents cannot leave that area. That is not a sustainable situation. Ending that occupation and enabling the Palestinians to have independence and self-determination in a sovereign, independent, economically viable state of their own is in the best interest of the United States, Israel, Palestinians, and the entire region. It is a necessary step in ensuring that Israel is accepted and integrated into a region that it has so much to offer. We should not downplay the political challenges of reaching a solution, and I am more than aware that there is enough blame to go around on all sides. While the peace process will be very difficult, agreements are possible if there is a serious willingness to sit down and talk and compromise. The truth is that the parameters of a solution are well known. They are based in international law, they are based in multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions, and they are supported by an overwhelmingly international consensus. Two states, based on the 1967 lines, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Netanyahu and his allies seem to be preparing for a future in which Israel controls the entire territory between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River in perpetuity, and the Palestinians receive limited autonomy within a disconnected series of communities. That is not an acceptable outcome for anyone who supports the security, freedom, and self-determination of both peoples, as I strongly do. Let me close by saying this. all over the world, including the United States. We are seeing the rise of intolerant, authoritarian political leaders who are attacking the very foundations of democratic societies. We see political leaders who exploit people's fears by amplifying resentments, stoking intolerance, and fanning ethnic and racial hatreds among those who are struggling. We see this very clearly in our own country. It is coming from the highest level of our government. Instead of using their leadership positions to bring people together around their common humanity and work together to resolve difficult global crises, these demagogues try to divide us up by our religion, by the color of our skin, by the country we came from, by our gender or our sexual orientation. I believe we can do better. I believe we must do better. As history reminds us time and time again, the antidote to hatred, division, and resentment is to bring people together around a shared vision of equality and prosperity, of creating societies that work for all and not just the few. And while we look at today's world with great concern, I am absolutely convinced that the future will belong not to those who practice bigotry and hatred, but to those of us who believe in peace and justice and are willing to fight for those values. And based on our history, no one should be more active in that struggle than the Jewish people. Thank you very much.
Please welcome AJC Co-Chair and Director of the Arthur and Rochelle Belfer Institute for Latino and Latin American Affairs, Dina Siegel Van and Mario Fleck.
"25 years after the July 18th attack against the AMIA Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, the Western Hemisphere remains on the front lines, confronting a global context in which democratic rule and principles are increasingly under assault, and the threat of terrorism is a clear and present danger. Despite ongoing and dire challenges, the governments and societies of the region, except for a few, continue to be anchored in a culture of democracy and human rights. Minorities, including thriving Jewish communities throughout the Americas, have benefited from a climate of inclusiveness and respect for diversity. But the rising anti-Semitism in the United States and elsewhere has made the need to face this scourge, as well as the continued global terrorist threat, a regional priority. The Organization of American States, the oldest and most prominent multilateral organization in the Western Hemisphere, plays an outsized role in promoting collaboration and solidarity among its 35 member states in the areas of democracy, human rights, security, and development. AJC was granted NGO status by OAS in 2005 and has remained a steadfast supporter of its critical mandate. Today's issues facing the OAS are daunting: debacle in Venezuela, Cuban and Russian efforts to block democratic and peaceful solutions, the resulting refugee crisis, Nicaragua's descent into authoritarianism, the growth of Hezbollah's criminal footprint in the region, to name a few.
No one has been better suited than the organization's visionary and courageous Secretary General to speak up loudly and clearly and rally the conscience of the Americas behind the core principles that the OAS upholds. Most immediately, Luis Almagro has been recognized as one of the key voices waking up the region to the urgent need for collective and decisive action against the hijacking of Venezuela by a tyrannical and criminal mafia, and for the immediate restoration of democracy. A lawyer, diplomat, and politician, we first had the privilege of meeting Secretary General Almagro when he served as Foreign Minister of Uruguay. Then as now, we found him to be profoundly thoughtful, fair-minded, principled and passionate, and an unwavering and fierce advocate of our shared causes, whether defending democracy, pursuing justice for the AMIA case, standing up in the Americas and beyond against the unlawful activity of terrorist entities such as Hezbollah, or strengthening the hemisphere's partnership with Israel to help address regional challenges. AJC deeply values Luis Almagro's inspired leadership of the Organization of American States and is proud to call this global statesman an ally and a friend. For exemplifying courageous and visionary leadership and for always being there when it counts, AJC proudly presents Luis Almagro today with our Champion of Democracy Award. Please join me in welcoming Secretary General Luis Almagro to the stage.
Dear friends, it is an honor to receive this award, which I accept on behalf of the millions of people who are today victims of hate and repression in the Americas. The fight for democracy and human rights is not an easy one, but it is the only way forward, especially in global and regional contexts in which voices that oppose the values of democracy and human rights have surged at an incredible speed. Attacks against democracy are on the rise. In the Western Hemisphere, those who attack democracy and human dignity have found fertile ground to operate in Cuba and Venezuela. And because evil breeds evil, and evil attracts evil, Latin American dictators in the 21st century have partnered with and acted alongside terrorist and anti-Semitic actors and organizations. Iran and Hezbollah, a terrorist organization, have a solid base of operations in South America in alliance with the illegitimate Maduro regime. This would have never have happened if there had been strong democratic institutions in place, a solid rule of law, and fearless defenders of democracy in our region. The international community must ensure that Venezuela finds its path to peace and democracy again. The cost of not doing so would be too high. If we fail in Venezuela, it could represent a victory for terrorism, organized transnational crime, and anti-Semitism, a victory for impunity in the Western Hemisphere. For the OAS, that would be immoral and unacceptable. Effectively fighting anti-Semitism here and around the world means fighting for democracy, for human rights, for stronger institutions and a culture of respect and acceptance. The international community has a responsibility to counter anti-Semitism and xenophobia. There is absolutely no excuse for inaction or denial. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, after its plenary in 2016, adopted the definition of anti-Semitism, which, as of now, as Secretary General, I make it the official definition of anti-Semitism for the work of the Organization of American States General Secretariat. As it says, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. To combat this hatred, We must work closely together. The American Jewish Committee has a long-standing presence in the Americas and close ties with local Jewish communities in Latin America. You are an essential partner of the OES, and you can count on our multilateral political platform for fight hatred, to educate, to increase awareness, and to help member states adopt measures and cooperate to fight anti-Semitism and terrorism. We must weaken hatred in its rhetorical state, and more so when it is translated into action. And our region is far from immune to the effects of terrorism, having witnessed the worst terrorist attack in the history of Argentina and the largest number of Jewish deaths from anti-Semitic terrorism outside Israel since World War II. The OES will work every day to achieve a hemisphere free of anti-Semitism, free of terrorism, free of dictatorships. We can achieve this. Acceptance, respect, and peaceful coexistence are possible, but we must do more, from the micro-local level to the multilateral level. We must do more to educate our people to have zero tolerance toward anti-Semitism. In all these efforts, the OES stands with the AJC. Thank you, and thank you again for this honor. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, history has just been made here. In the words of Luis Almagro, Luis Almagro, as the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, has for the first time in Latin America expressed a commitment to adopt the working definition of anti-Semitism. This is the first time it has happened in Latin America. It happened here, and it happened thanks to Luis Almagro. And I have never heard in my 30 years of dealing with Latin America as clear and crisp a denunciation of the activities of Iran and Hezbollah in Latin America as we just heard this morning. Again, history was made. We owe an enormous debt of gratitude to our dear friend, Luis Almagro.
Please welcome incoming AJC President, Harriet Schleifer.
Through our Greetings from the Trail series of presidential candidate videos, we've been able to hear a wide variety of perspectives from the American left. And as an organization that prides ourselves on our nonpartisanship, AJC is proud to present a range of voices from the right. Senator Ted Cruz has been a steadfast ally of the Jewish people and the State of Israel throughout his career. He spoke out fervently on the need for the United States to recognize what we all know, that Jerusalem is the one true capital of Israel. From appointing special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, Ilan Carr, who joined us on our plenary stage yesterday, to recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan, implementing a series of tough measures to counter Iranian threats to regional and global peace, Senator Cruz has been a proud partner of the Trump administration in the strong steps that they've taken to stand with Israel. Senator Cruz is also a close friend of AJC. He has met with a wide array of AJC leadership, both in Dallas and Houston and here in Washington. And we are glad to welcome him today at our AJC Global Forum. Please welcome Senator Ted Cruz.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning. I apologize. I've got a bit of a cold, so I apologize for the hoarse voice, but it is wonderful to be with you this morning. Thank you for your strong, clear, clarion support of the nation of Israel. You know, for me, support for Israel is a deep, personal, and passionate commitment. And in my time in the Senate, now 7 years, boy, time flies, I've tried to advance the U.S.-Israel friendship and relationship on 3 parallel paths. First of all, focusing on what I call rifle-shot legislation. Single-focused bills that can bring together bipartisan support and that can pass. For example, in the National Defense Authorization Act, year after year I've introduced amendments that have passed into law increasing U.S. military assistance for Israel, increasing funding for the Iron Dome and Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 and the missile defense that has saved so many lives in Israel as they faced rocket attacks and terror attacks at home. And just last December, a bill I introduced passed into law. It was a bill targeting human shields, and it provides for tough sanctions for nations and for organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah that employ human shields either against Americans, against our military, or against our close allies like the nation of Israel. That legislation passed and was signed into law. Both of those are examples of focused, narrow rifle shot legislation that you can pass that makes a difference. And indeed, the human shields legislation built upon several years ago, I had joined with Democratic Senator Bob Menendez and with Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand in authoring 2 different resolutions that passed the Senate unanimously targeting human shields, condemning the use of human shields as a war crime, and providing rewards for those who kidnap and murder U.S. citizens in Israel. A second component, a second path in terms of strengthening the U.S.-Israel relationship is winning hearts and minds. And I got to say, I think all of us in the pro-Israel community, we don't do a good enough job of engaging in the battle of ideas. If you look at college campuses, where the BDS movement is resurgent, we don't do a nearly good enough job making the case, and that's something that I've tried to do consistently. We all remember several years ago when 3 Israeli teenagers had been kidnapped by Hamas. I gave a long speech on the Senate floor with pictures of each of those 3 boys behind me, telling their stories, who they were, what they liked to do. Now, tragically, we didn't know at the time, but we know since those 3 boys were murdered. One of them was a U.S. citizen. That was the legislation I referenced a minute ago that I passed to provide a $5 million reward for information leading to the capture of his terrorists. The importance of telling that story, you know, Stalin chillingly said, 1 death is a tragedy, 1 million a statistic. Making the lives that are lost through terrorism in Israel, making them real, helping people understand, I think is tremendously important. Several years ago, I wrote an op-ed. It's called A Tale of 2 Hospitals. And it says you can learn a lot about a society by how they treat their most vulnerable. And it compares two hospitals. One, the Ziv Hospital in northern Israel that I've visited, that at the time I went there, it had given away over $8 million in free medical care to Syrians over the northern border who had been injured in the horrific civil war there. And I remember meeting with Israeli physicians who described how a little Syrian boy, a little Syrian girl would go to bed in their bedroom, and a barrel bomb would go off and blow up, and they'd be horribly injured. They'd wake up, and those children, more often than not, even though they had a horrific injury, they were more terrified of being in Israel surrounded by Israelis. And this one Israeli physician, I remember she told me about a Syrian mother who marveled. She said, my whole life, the government, I've been told, is there to protect me. Now they're trying to kill me. And my whole life, the people I've been told hate me and want to kill me. Now they're saving my life and saving the lives of my kids. Now, in this op-ed, I contrast the Ziv Hospital to the hospital in Gaza in whose basement Hamas set up their headquarters. Now, this is a Palestinian hospital, and they are quite literally using Palestinian men, women, children, infants as human shields. Because from their perspective, it's actually a win-win. One of two things from their perspective would happen. One, the IDF would refrain from striking their headquarters. Now, that's a win, obviously. If they don't take out their headquarters, they can continue to plot and organize terrorist attacks. Or two, if the IDF were to strike their headquarters, they would hit the hospital and you would suddenly see the bodies of women and newborn children on the news, and the entire world, particularly the news media, could be counted to denounce Israel and to blame Israel for that loss of life. Prime Minister Netanyahu put it powerfully when he said, we use our missiles to protect our citizens. They use their citizens to protect their missiles. And so I thank you for the tremendous efforts AJC is doing, and let me encourage you to do more to win hearts and minds, to say there's not a moral equivalency between terrorists who go into civilian populations and blow themselves up and murder innocent women, men, and children, and brave IDF forces who are protecting those innocent men, women, and children who risk their lives. They're not the same, they're not morally equivalent, but we have to explain it, and we have to make the case on the facts and on the merits. The third parallel track I've focused on is big picture, major structural changes. And I want to highlight two in particular. Number one, as we stand here today in 2019, the American Embassy in Israel is in Jerusalem, the once and eternal capital of Israel. That was a major battle in the Trump administration. As you know, presidents of both parties have promised to move our embassy to Jerusalem, and presidents of both parties have broken that promise. In the Trump administration, there was a major battle. You had both state and defense arguing against moving the embassy. And I was deeply engaged on the other side of that argument, making the case very directly to the president. Now, the argument they gave against moving the embassy is they said it would inflame the tensions with Israel's enemies, that they would be angry at us. I have to admit, my first reaction was like they're not angry already. But I said, listen, if the goal is Middle East peace, and I think this administration hopes to bring about peace, I'm not convinced that's immediately in the offing. But if the goal is peace, I believe moving the embassy makes peace more likely. And the reason that I argued to the president of the administration is I said, listen, if we move the embassy, we can expect our Arab allies. We can expect the Jordanians and the Egyptians and the Saudis to denounce the step. They'll feel they have to because of domestic political reasons. But I said, I believe privately they will be deeply, deeply relieved if we move the embassy, and here's why. Because they will say, you know what? an administration and a president with the backbone, with the guts to move the embassy to Jerusalem and to risk the scorn of the global media opinion, maybe, just maybe, might have the guts and backbone to pull out of the disastrous Iranian nuclear deal. So I was in Jerusalem the day we opened our embassy. It was the 70th anniversary of the creation of the modern state of Israel. I'll tell you, it was a powerful, powerful time. I've been to Israel many times. I've never seen the joy and jubilation. Israelis, Americans dancing in the street. I visited with one woman who was a Holocaust survivor and who just had tears running down her face. She said, "I never thought I would live to see this day." That same week that we opened the embassy is the week that the president announced he was withdrawing from the disastrous Iranian nuclear deal. And that was the second big picture battle. Within the Trump administration, a battle raged over that, and the battle lines were exactly the same. You had state and defense both arguing, don't pull out of the deal, keep the deal going. And I engaged very directly with the president, with the administration. I believe that the Iranian nuclear deal was catastrophically foolish. I think sending tens of billions of dollars to the Ayatollah Khamenei, who chants death to America, who calls Israel the little Satan, who calls America the great Satan, I think that was profoundly foolish. If history teaches anything, it's that if someone tells you they want to kill you, believe them. I believe the president pulling out of the Iran deal was the single most important national security decision that has been made in the last 2.5 years. And I have consistently, since that time, been pressing the administration, pressing the State Department to ratchet up the pressure to end the multiple waivers that were in place, the oil waivers that allowed Iran to sell over 1 million barrels of oil a day, the civilian nuclear waivers that allowed Iran to continue nuclear research, including at the Fordo plant, cut into the side of a mountain, a bunker designed to develop nuclear weapons. And we've steadily moved to ratcheting up the pressure. I believe maximum pressure should mean maximum pressure. And so we should use every tool we have to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons because, among other things, not only are they developing nuclear weapons, but they're developing ICBM technology. And ICBM technology is not designed to take a bomb to Israel. You don't need an ICBM to get to Israel. An ICBM has one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to take a nuclear weapon to the United States of America. Those changes have been major, they've been significant, and I believe they have dramatically enhanced the safety of both Israel and the United States. Let me point to two other matters that are ongoing right now. This is, on one level, an encouraging time. I think the U.S.-Israel relationship and friendship has never been stronger. On another level, it's a discouraging time. We see the rise of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic remarks. We see anti-Semitic cartoons in the New York Times. We see anti-Semitic comments by members of Congress. For a long time, there's been a strong bipartisan commitment to the U.S.-Israel relationship. And I thank the AJC for the important role y'all play in keeping that commitment going. That commitment, I believe, has been frayed, and it's painful to see it frayed. One of the things we saw was the House of Representatives unable to pass even a simple anti-Semitism resolution that condemned anti-Semitism unequivocally. That divisions within the Democratic Party paralyzed them. Now, I want to give you some good news. In the Senate, I've introduced a simple, clear resolution condemning anti-Semitism in all its forms. And it was important for me for this not to be a partisan exercise, and so I reached out and teamed up with Senator Tim Kaine. The two of us together, it's the Cruz-Kaine resolution. We have right now over 50 senators who are co-sponsors, including 12 Democrats who are co-sponsors of the anti-Semitism resolution. It is my hope It is my hope that we will take this up on the floor of the Senate, we will vote on it, and I think if we do, I think there's a real chance that we will end up voting 100-0, and I think it would be very, very important at this point in time to see a unanimous, bipartisan, clear condemnation of anti-Semitism. So as y'all are visiting with senators, I would encourage you to encourage them to get on board. I think it is important for us to speak with one voice. There's a second piece of legislation I have that is substantive legislation that recognizes the Golan Heights as part of Israel. Now that is something the administration did unilaterally, and I leaned in hard urging the administration to do that unilaterally. If you look at the substance, almost nobody makes the case on the other side anymore. There was a time 20 years ago where you might argue about whether the Golan Heights is legitimately part of Israel. Nobody makes that argument today. Nobody within Israeli politics makes that argument today. And nobody from an American perspective does either, because no one in their right mind would want the Golan Heights under the control of Bashar Assad and Syria's government, much less under the control of Iran or Russia. It is clear the Golan Heights are critical to the safety and security of Israel. They are part of Israel, so recognizing it is simply acknowledging reality. I think it is important that we codify that into law so that there is not a risk of a substantive, the next administration potentially undoing that decision. I don't want this to be subject to political whims. In the House, a number of House Democrats have spoken out publicly in favor of the policy of recognizing the Golan, but to date, none of those House Democrats have been willing to join the legislation doing that. In the Senate, I think if we tee it up and get a vote in the Senate, I think we've got a real chance at once again getting a 100-0 vote, getting a bipartisan, unequivocal, clear statement of the entire United States Senate coming together to stand with Israel. I hope that we do that. I think it's important right now at this moment of time that we show clear, strong unanimity. So I thank you for the leadership of the AJC building and maintaining that support, and I am grateful, I am honored to stand with each of you. Thank you.
This is where I felt the most comfortable in any of the Jewish organizations. So I wanted this to be my Jewish home away from home. That's why I came to AJC. I wanted to do something in an impactful way and an inclusive way. But in terms of having my daughter follow along this path, I mean, it's very rewarding.
I became involved with AJC because my mother had demonstrated to us, whether it was through her own time and her own commitment or from bringing us to events to be part of what she was doing, that it was important. I mean, all you can do is try and show your kids what matters to you and hope that they pay attention. And so that's what I tried to do too. Every now and then I'll start a conversation at home and they'll say, oh, I can tell this is gonna be like, what happened at AJC today? And it is, it's what happened at AJC today, because that's some of what we want to talk about at the dinner table every night. One of the things that I think is so wonderful about LIFT is that for the kids who have a very clear and present urgency about combating anti-Semitism right now and who feel that urgency, LIFT is giving them the skills that they need and that they can act on immediately. I think that my kids have gotten from LIFT a heightened awareness. I really think that having them be part of this is very special. They know how much it's meant to me over the years, and so they just understood that this was something that they were going to be doing too, and that was really wonderful to watch.
I'm so proud. I'm always proud of Lisa, but this makes me especially happy that she's made AJC such a part of her life.
Please welcome AJC Executive Council Member Tony Meyer.
Good morning. As a member of AJC's Executive Council, it's my honor to introduce Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. Congressman Jeffries has established himself as a rising star in the Democratic Party. As the recently elected chair of the House Democratic Caucus, Congressman Jeffries has become a prominent voice in the new House Democratic majority. A former three-term state legislator, clerk for a federal district court judge, and corporate lawyer, Hakeem Jeffries represents New York's 8th congressional district, encompassing large parts of Brooklyn and a section of Queens. He describes his district as the 9th most African-American district in the country and the 14th most Jewish. Last fall, he was elected to his 4th term in Congress. Throughout his career, Congressman Jeffries has been a steadfast advocate for the protection of civil rights and human dignity in our country and around the world. And Congressman Jeffries, a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, has been a stalwart supporter of Israel as well. And he memorably declared that America's commitment to Israel's security is essential, stating that the only thing that neighbors respect in a tough neighborhood is strength. Hakeem Jeffries has been a great friend to AJC in New York and nationally, and we are honored to have him here with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Congressman Hakeem Jeffries.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you, Tony, for your leadership and your very generous words of introduction. Let me thank John for the completion of his service and congratulate Harriet as she assumes the mantle later on today, or as we say in Brooklyn, Mazel Tov. But we look forward to her leadership and, of course, thankful for David and to Michael. And let me also shout out the AJC New York delegation, which I know is represented in a tremendous way. As was mentioned, I currently serve as the chair of the House Democratic Caucus. It's a great honor, but represent the 8th Congressional District in the United States Congress, parts of Brooklyn and Queens. The 8th Congressional District is one of the most diverse districts in the nation. In fact, 33% of the people I represent were born outside of the United States of America. We know traditionally people come from all over the world to places like Brooklyn and Queens to pursue the American dream. And so I have the great honor and privilege of representing African Americans, Caribbean Americans, Latinos, the Asian American community, the Orthodox Jewish community, the Reform Jewish community, Italian Americans, Irish Americans, and I'm still not done. Bangladeshi Americans, Turkish Americans, Pakistani Americans, and I'm quite proud of the fact, more Russian-speaking Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union than any other member of Congress in the country. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries, who knew? Only in America. And as was mentioned by Tony, I have the 9th most African-American district in the country and the 14th most Jewish. My friend, Leon Goldenberg, back home often reminds me, Hakeem, you've got the best of both worlds. And I agree wholeheartedly with that sentiment. And I'm proud of the fact that yesterday, with AJC's leadership, we are launching the Black and Jewish Caucus in the United States House of Representatives, and I will be a proud founding member of that effort. And we're thankful for that. We've stood together year after year, decade after decade, century into century. We will continue to stand together forever. And we're thankful for that. We do have challenging issues, of course, that we have to work through as a country. The rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of hatred, the rise of bigotry. A lot of work for us to do together. You know, in Brooklyn, we used to have a baseball team, the Brooklyn Dodgers, and of course there were the... I tell you, Brooklyn is always in the house. But you had the Brooklyn Dodgers. At the same time, you had, in the 40s into the 50s, of course, the New York Yankees and also the New York Giants at the time were playing in the Polo Grounds. And I had a law professor, my former dean, actually, John Sexton, who would often say to us that back then in New York City, you can sometimes tell your political affiliation based on who you rooted for as a baseball team. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you know, Brooklyn Dodgers, Pee Wee Reese and Jackie Robinson, they were kind of the underdogs often, and Sandy Koufax and so many others. You know, they tended to be Democrats in terms of your political affiliation if you were a Dodger fan. He said the Yankees, you know, that was the establishment, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, the great Yankees, Yogi Berra, they tended to be Republicans. And I said, well, who were Giant fans? He said, well, those are undecided swing voters. But I just wanted to say that whether you are a Dodger fan, a Yankee fan, a Giant fan, we are all going to make sure we stand against the rise of anti-Semitism in this country, stand against bigotry, stand against hatred, and stand against the effort to try to delegitimize the state of Israel. It is important that we keep it a bipartisan issue, and I'm committed to that cause. And that's why I'm proud to join my colleagues, Ted Deutsch and Jerry Nadler and others, on a strong anti-BDS resolution, because we are recognizing BDS for what it is. An effort to try to delegitimize the state of Israel. We will not let it stand, and I will always rise up for the principle that Israel will remain a Jewish and democratic state. And we will stand with Israel today, stand with Israel tomorrow, and stand with Israel forever because of our shared values, our shared commitment, our shared democracy. I've had the opportunity to visit Israel on several occasions, 3 times. I've been, I'll go a 4th time in August with several members of the new freshman class on the trip that has been led for years by Steny Hoyer, and we're all looking forward to it. When I went to Israel the first time, I think the most profound conversation that I had was with a member of the IDF, senior leader, and I asked him just to sum up in the most appropriate way he thought he could the security challenges that confronted Israel. And I'll never forget it. He said, Hakeem, Israel lives in a tough neighborhood. And I thought it was an incisive and elegant description of the perilous situation that Israel confronts on a day-to-day basis. Hamas in Gaza, dangerous situation in the Sinai, Hezbollah to the north, chaos in Syria, Iraq still a mess, Iran with nuclear aspirations. You know, I grew up and came of age in central Brooklyn in the late 80s and early 90s. It was a tough neighborhood. I know from tough neighborhoods. And Israel lives in a tough neighborhood, and as I've often said publicly, in a tough neighborhood, at the end of the day, the only constant, the only thing that your neighbors will respect is strength. And that is why we're going to maintain our commitment to ensuring that Israel maintains its qualitative military edge and can remain strong and capable of defending itself in the same way that every other nation in the world has the right to defend itself. and we will stand by Israel when it exercises that right and ensure that they can continue to protect themselves in a defensive way as they have been doing with Iron Dome, David's Arrow, and David's Sling, and the secure defense systems that they have developed and will continue to develop as a result of this close partnership with the United States of America. We also, of course, need to address this poisonous rise of anti-Semitism that is taking shape in the United States and in Europe and increasingly in many parts of the world. And to do it with every single voice. It should not just fall on the Jewish community to stand up against anti-Semitism. Dr. King once said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And anti-Semitism, a great injustice, a poison, a cancer which must be stamped out and eradicated. And all of us bear the responsibility to join AJC in your leadership efforts to address this scourge. And I do it understanding the shared history as a people, African Americans and the Jewish community, with a particular reference to the district that I'm proud to represent, not just the diversity that I mentioned, but the history of it. We know that Dr. King in the 60s famously spoke up about the issue related to Soviet Jewry and the oppression that was taking place behind that Iron Curtain. And in the midst of him working through the issues around the civil rights movement to try to create equal protection under the law and liberty and justice for all, took the time out to use his voice to address the issue of oppression of Soviet Jews and the anti-Semitism that was underlying it. And now I have the opportunity to represent, as I mentioned, more Russian-speaking Jewish immigrants from that former Soviet Union, and I talk a lot about that trajectory and the intersection and the responsibility that I have to continue along the same path and the foundation that was laid by Dr. King. But then I also will mention the people that I represent in central Brooklyn and in Bedford-Stuyvesant and other parts, that I'm proud to represent parts of a district that used to be represented by a prominent Jewish congressman named Emanuel Seller. He served in Congress for 50 years. He was right next to Truman when the United States became the first nation to recognize the state of Israel. He was a prominent leader on issues of the U.S.-Israel relationship. I'm proud to stand on his shoulders and that legacy. But one of the things that's not known about Congressman Emanuel Seller, Manny Seller, as he was affectionately referred to in Brooklyn, is that as he was working through issues related to Israel or anti-Semitism and things of this nature, he was also, in the 1960s, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. And as the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, played an instrumental role in making sure that Congress passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Emanuel Seller stood with the African American community, just as Dr. King stood with the Jewish community. It's a great legacy, and I'm so thankful that members of the House of Representatives, with your leadership, at such a perilous time, recognize that legacy, recognize the importance of our communities standing together. We will denounce and stamp out the rise of hatred. We will denounce and stamp out the rise of anti-Semitism. We will denounce intolerance in any form. We will denounce accusations of dual loyalty. And we will stand together as one community, African Americans and Jews, as part of a great nation. And together, we'll continue our long, necessary, and majestic march toward a more perfect union. So God bless you, God bless AJC, and God bless the United States of America.
The AJC has been a game changer, specifically in the fight against anti-Semitism. The impact that the AJC has made cannot be overstated.
The smallest of acts and the smallest of changes can and actually do move things forward, even if we can always do more. Essentially, that's what being Jewish has always and will always be for me.
Darkness cannot put out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that.
The AJC has always been the most honest organisation. Honest about how bad the problem is, but never overstating any example.
I am very, very thankful you gave me this honor.
Anything is possible. As we move forward with our community of conscience, let that be our guiding principle from tonight forward. Anything is possible.
We win by making allies, not by making enemies. Young people are the future of the Jewish community, and we're already taking on that challenge.
Please welcome AJC Chief Executive Officer, David Harris.
Earlier this morning, Edwin Schuker spoke very powerfully in the faces of the diaspora to us about the journey from Iraq, Babylonia, forward. And he gave us a mission. It's not a new mission, but he reminded us of an ancient mission. Said he to us, to AJC, Lech Lecha. Said he, from this stage, AJC, go forward. And we will. And I thank him. I want to reflect for just a moment or two on the last 72 hours by noting not only was history made from this stage, the community of conscience, the Black Jewish Caucus, Luis Almagro's embrace of the working definition of anti-Semitism for the OAS, but we also set a record in our 113-year history at AJC. we set a record. For the first time ever, we could legitimately claim that we had 5% of an entire Jewish community on the stage. We've had big delegations from the US and other countries, but not only did we have 5% of the Jewish community of Myanmar here, but we also got a silver medalist. We had 2.5% of the entire Jewish community of Bahrain on this stage. I hope one day we'll have 5% of the American Jewish community here with us as well. And as a fallback position, we can start with 2.5%. This has been a powerfully moving couple of days, certainly for me, I hope for all of you. As we said from the outset, our goal this year was something different. Last year, of course, we broke the mold with Jerusalem. This year, we were especially eager to, as we've said, capture the zeitgeist. What's on people's minds? So we were less concerned about simply getting names for the sake of names or titles for the sake of titles and trying to wow you. We wanted to get inside our own confused, conflicted heads. As Jews, as Americans, as democratic with a lowercase d citizens of the United States and other countries, and kind of grapple with these very complicated issues and often conflicted feelings. I hope we've succeeded. Have we? But the real test, I think, for any global forum is not just to recount the numbers, nearly 2,500 participants, more than 50 countries, 39 dinners with ambassadors or deputy ambassadors last night, more than 120 meetings this afternoon with members of Congress, both American congressmen and British members of parliament on the stage, and so much more. The real test of the global forum, I think, actually begins now. What do we do with all the information? Put aside the numbers. What's changed within us? Do we feel any differently? I do. I think, for example, of the 39-year-old Frenchman on the stage who devoted a good chunk of his life, first of all, to serving in the IDF as a French citizen, and then coming back and literally defending the security of Jews in France, devoting his life and risking his life for that. I feel differently. I feel differently because those three eminent figures battling anti-Semitism from the United States, from the EU, and from the UK need our help. I feel differently because I know that Felix Klein is a friend, the Commissioner of Jewish Life in Germany, but I hope, like you, I am outraged that in contemporary Germany, Jews are warned that they may be at risk if they wear a kippah. To jump ahead for a moment, we're going to Berlin next year, and I'll return to the theme. But I want and hope that on Shabbat evening in Berlin, we will all wear a kippah, and we will all and whether we are Jewish or not, observant or not, synagogue going or not, we will stand by those of us who wear a kippah regularly, and we will walk through the streets of Berlin together to affirm our pride and to show there is no fear. We will not be denied. We will not be denied our right to affirm our identity, and I feel a commitment to the students at NYU and to the students of the French Union of Jewish Students and those others who've been honored before and those who are unheralded and may never be honored, those students must never stand alone. Those students are our children. Those students are our grandchildren. Those students are our nieces and nephews. They are today on the front lines in an effort that seeks to intimidate, bully, and silence those Jewish students for being Jewish and affirming their connection to Israel. And if AJC doesn't act tomorrow and the day after, we are failing and flagging in our responsibility to them and to our collective future. And just a couple of weeks ago, when we flew to Israel for the interview with the Prime Minister, we came on the tail end of 690 rockets and missiles that had been fired from Gaza, including to the hospital we visited in Ashkelon, and the missile hit the oncology unit. By the way, the same hospital that receives victims from Gaza who cannot get medical help in Gaza because too much of the hospital space is occupied by Hamas headquarters, and who come to Israel. And even those hospitals are not off limits. I feel even more a responsibility on behalf of AJC to those in Israel for whom, tragically, this has become a normalized way of life. It cannot be their struggle alone. It's our collective struggle. Lech lecha. And so I want to simply ask you, before you leave, to think about behavioral change. It begins this afternoon. We're all going to the Hill, I hope. We need all of you. We need to be there today. You heard Hakeem Jeffries and Ted Cruz and Rob Portman say we also need to be there tomorrow and the day after. They need us and we need them. We need to be at the Hill, and we need to be as smart and savvy and sophisticated as we can in conveying our messages. Number two, we need to complete the challenge grant, please. We need to exceed the challenge grant, please. We only have $45,000 to go to meet that wonderful $500,000 challenge grant. But let's not nickel and dime. This organization is fighting not just for our future, but our collective future, your future, and we can't do it without adequate resources. You heard John Mann say what he said about AJC. I can go through all of the validations and endorsements. You want to ensure your family's future. I get that. So do I. But your family's future depends on our future, just as our future depends on your family's future. I'm asking you at this moment in time, which is defining for history, Jewish history, and for us as Jews, to please consider additional gifts to AJC, to take advantage of the challenge grant and to go well beyond it, to allow us to continue to build the global architecture, the programming, to seize the new opportunities, the Black Jewish Caucus, the community of conscience. I can go down a longer list. We can't do it on fumes alone. We turn to you again as our most dedicated supporters. And the last thing I'd like to ask you to do is to first turn your attention to the screens, because we're about to unveil officially the worst-kept secret in AJC, L'Shana Haba'a Beberlin. And then, after you see the film, I'm going to invite the Deputy Chief of Mission, the Deputy Ambassador of Germany, our friend Boris Rouge, to the stage in order to read a special message from Angela Merkel to you. And then we'll all rush, I hope, to the registration booth just outside because, and this is true, this is not that kind of New York promo stuff, we are capping registration next year. We have a very unique model. We are, in a way, sort of owning a large hotel space. It will be ours. The gym will be ours. The bars and the restaurants will be ours. The elevators will be ours. We want to create a virtual Jewish AJC community in Berlin, so we're capping it. In Jerusalem, we didn't cap it, and as a Zionist, I couldn't cap it. How could we turn people away from wanting to come to Israel? But in Berlin, we've decided to cap it. We want you all to be there. Don't be disappointed. Register now if you would. But first to the screens, please.
"75 years after World War II, and 30 years after reunification,
tear down this wall."
Germany once again looms large for the Jewish people. As an ascendant nation that is again home to a vibrant and growing Jewish community, as a pivotal component to the transatlantic alliance, and as a vital partner to Israel. Now, more than 20 years after AJC became the first American Jewish organization with a permanent presence in Berlin, history will be made again when a groundbreaking gathering convenes. AJC Global Forum comes to Berlin and presents an unparalleled opportunity for all who care about the relationship between Israel and Germany, for all who want to combat rising anti-Semitism in Germany and Europe, for all who recognize the dangers of fraying ties between America and its European allies, for all who are concerned that the searing pain of the Holocaust and its lessons are fading from consciousness, for all who want to make history and show the world the impact of global Jewish advocacy. Join us for a truly historic event, AJC Global Forum 2020 in Berlin.
And would Boris Rouge please come up?
Ladies and gentlemen, what an impressive gathering. I'm truly honored to be here to represent the government of Germany and our embassy today. And I have one job, and one job only, and that is to read out the message from Chancellor Angela Merkel. Here goes. Berlin, June 2019. Dear President Shapiro, dear David Harris, dear delegates, I am absolutely delighted that the American Jewish Committee has decided to hold its global forum in Berlin next year. I regard this decision as a sign of trust. We in Germany are profoundly grateful for this. After the end of the Shoah, which was a betrayal of all civilized values, and of the Second World War, the American Jewish Committee reestablished contact with Germany as early as 1949. This led to a close network of transatlantic reconciliation and friendship. We can now share and delight at the fact that Jewish life is flourishing once again in Germany. We are also united in opposing anti-Semitism, racism, and xenophobia, and championing human rights, democracy, and pluralism in Germany, Europe, the United States, and worldwide. I would like to thank the American Jewish Committee for its tireless and extremely important work, which is very much in the spirit of its motto, defend our values, define our world. I wish you a successful AJC Global Forum 2019 and greatly look forward to next year's Global Forum in Berlin. Signed, Angela Merkel. Thank you for your attention. See you in Berlin.
You'll see me in Berlin. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. So, to wrap up, when you leave the hall, if you wish, go straight to the registration booth. I think you'll already begin to feel the sort of festive, gemütlich atmosphere we're trying to create. Before we wrap up, though, a lot of work went into this. I don't want to name names. I'd like all the staff who are here in the hall to please stand up, and for all the staff to be recognized. See you on the Hill, and see you in Berlin.